In the last video, we looked at how the USA expanded in this early kind of period of their country. And as well as expanding land, the other thing that massively expanded in this period was slavery. And in this video, I'd really like to look at how and why slavery grew in a country that was founded on these democratic ideals of being the land of the free. Let's start by looking at how slavery expanded. And I'm going to show you that with two maps. This map here is of the 1790 census. So a census is where you record the number of people in a country. And in the census of 1790, they included the number of enslaved people. Now, as you can see here, the deeper, darker reds are the areas where there is more slavery, and the lighter colours are where there is none. And in 1790, slavery was already still a massive element of the United States, and the enslaved population at this time was nearly 700,000 people. You can see here, though, that most of these slaves are towards the south, but there's still a significant number in the north. Now, I'm going to zoom forwards 40 years to the census of 1830. Let's look at what's changed. Now, by 1830, the US had expanded, so you can see it's a bigger region. But in addition to that, slavery had massively expanded. And really, within 40 years, that slave population grows from 700,000 people to 2 million by 1830. And by 1830, nearly all of that population is in the South. And we call this region the Deep South in America. And the Deep South is where slavery grew during this period. Now, as those two maps show, there's a massive difference between the North and the South. And it's important that we do look at why there was a difference between the North and the South. Firstly, there were economic reasons why there was a difference. In the South, the climate of the South meant they could have plantations, and plantations are large farms that grew tobacco, rice and cotton, and you need warm climate to do that. The South was perfect for that. The North was not suitable for plantations, and as a result, plantations never started in the North, so slavery was never an element of the North. Secondly, there are religious reasons. The church in the North preached that God had made all men free, whereas the church in the South preached that God had made black people to serve white people. And even though everybody is Christian, there are different religious reasons. And for these reasons, really, the North and the South grow apart in terms of its opinion about slavery. And slavery, as we saw in the map previously, was expanding at a rapid rate in the South. So this raises the question, why? And if we look at why slavery grew in the South, there are four major factors. Firstly, a forced movement of the enslaved. Secondly, the invention of the cotton gin. Thirdly, the pushing system. And lastly, the Louisiana Purchase. Let's look at each of these factors one by one to understand why they meant that slavery grew. So the first reason why slavery grew was the forced movement of the enslaved. And you can see that happening in this picture here, where slave traders are moving enslaved people south. Now, this engraving here would have been made by a white person, so it looks a lot more pleasant than it actually would have in reality. In reality, this would have been a forced march of people in chains. Now, as new areas in the South open up, slave traders buy up slaves in those old slave states and they march them to the Deep South. So you can see that here, this man on the horse at the front would have been a slave trader, and he would have bought these slaves in one of those kind of more central or northern states, and he is marching them to the Deep South where they will work in the plantations. And slave traders made vast profits, often nearly $1,000 per slave. And that led to this movement on a vast scale. And it even led to the movement of some people kidnapping free black people in the North who were not enslaved and pushing them into slavery. So reason one why slavery grew in the South is that all of the enslaved people are moved towards those deep South states. The second reason why slavery grew in the South was because of the cotton gin. Now, up to the end of the 18th century, the plantations in the South had been growing tobacco, rice and cotton, but not cotton on a vast scale, because cotton production was difficult. If you don't know, cotton grows on a plant like this, and that white fluffy material is what makes cotton that we wear in our clothes and have in our bed sheets and is in much of fabric. But when you pull that white cotton off the plant, the white cotton is full of seeds, and you have to pull the seeds out. Now, up to the 1790s, that was done by hand. But in 1793, Eli Whitney created something called the cotton gin, and it's this invention that you can see at the bottom of this slide here. And the cotton gin was simple because you could put the cotton in and it would remove the seeds by machine. That sped everything up, and the cotton gin allowed plantations to start growing cotton on a massive scale, and that cotton was then sent all over the world. So a product of slavery was really sent everywhere, including to England, where it led to the Industrial Revolution. So the second reason is the invention of the cotton gin that allows cotton to start as a new product. Now this went hand in hand with something called the pushing system. And to keep up with the speed of the cotton gin, the pickers, the enslaved people that you can see here, needed to work fast. And so the plantation owners developed something called the pushing system. What that basically means is pushing the enslaved people to work harder and faster. So all that cotton was made at the cost of the enslaved, who were treated horrifically to make that product grow at an even faster rate. Now the fourth reason why slavery grew was because of the Louisiana Purchase, and I know we saw this in the previous video, that in 1803 Louisiana is bought from the French and the US acquire vast areas of land. Now that vast area of land that they purchased in Louisiana was perfect for growing cotton. Perfect climatic conditions for growing cotton. And the area shown on this map here, this yellow area, which is where the main slave producing regions in the US were, that area becomes known as the Cotton Kingdom. The Cotton Kingdom. It becomes this nickname because all throughout the regions of the Deep South, slavery was producing cotton on a massive scale. And to show you the extent of the massive scale, by 1820, over 42% of all US exports were cotton. So nearly a half of all of the exports from the entire country were cotton, and much of that cotton was then sent to the UK. Much of that cotton was then sent to the factories of the north of England, where it was then turned into fabric and clothes. So why did slavery grow in the Deep South? 4 reasons. Firstly, they moved enslaved people there. Secondly, the cotton gin meant changing production to cotton meant more money for the plantation owners. To make that cotton gin work effectively, the pushing system meant pushing slaves in an even harder way than before. And lastly, the Louisiana Purchase allowed new land so that cotton could be grown on an even bigger scale. But there's one thing that we've really not talked about in this video, because running as an undercurrent to all of that really explains why slavery grew in the Deep South, is racism. And the racist ideas that these people held and the views that they held of black people meant that they treated people in an awful way, that this horrendous method of production grew at a vast scale. And so again, that idea that we need to think about is that the United States, a country that is known as the land of the free, had running under the surface that idea of racism, and racism was really enabling it to produce an economy that was vast and horrendously effective. But racism is that undercurrent that we need to be thinking about.